It's a collective, not a survey engine, but it's a collective platform for.
Okay, everybody,
communications.
welcome to our Tuesday, October 11th special meeting tonight. We have some council members here in chambers, one remote, a couple he will not make it, so let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is really a workshop discussion to just kind of go through the budget process and how it's all together and that kind of thing. So we'll get into more into that and we get to number 5. So go ahead and call the meeting to order. And I'll do the quick roll call. Councilmember Cargill.
Present.
Councilmember Kurtz.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Collier. I saw.
Here.
Councilmember Dunn.
Happy to be here.
Councilmember Solberg.
Here.
And Councilmember Van Orman is ill tonight and Councilmember Spencer is on business. We have a motion to excuse both of them, please.
I'll make a motion to excuse both council members.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilman Kurtz and a second by Councilmember Cargill. All in favor of excusing those two, please say aye.
Aye.
Right.
Passes 5. Right, okay, so agenda approval. Mayor Pro Tem, you want to do that? You want somebody here too?
Somebody there could do it. That might be better.
Madam Mayor, I move the agenda as published.
We have a second.
Second.
And a second by Councilmember Kurtz. Any discussion? Questions? Seeing or hearing any, all in favor of approving the agenda as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
All right, motion passes 5-0. All right, we are up to citizen comments. I don't see anybody here in chambers, but if there's anybody joining us remotely who would like to make a citizen comment, please just send a note to Todd Henderson in the chat feature. You'll have up to 3 minutes to make a comment about really any subject tonight. And then we will move on from there. So I see one person not currently on council or related to the city here. So I don't know if there's anybody hiding, but it doesn't look like we have any citizen comments. Todd, can you just confirm? Okay. All right, we'll move on. Go ahead and move on to the workshop discussion. So like I was saying earlier, so tonight really, since we the intention is to be informative and educational. We do have quite a few new members of the council to go through the mechanics, what the budget process is, how is it put together, and a few other, high level details, not with no intention of getting into the line item specifics tonight. That will start with our first budget meeting on the 25th. But I just thought it was really a good idea to kind of take it back to the beginning. How's this put together? I know I didn't have this when I started 13 years ago. It would have been very helpful. So this is really kind of Kyle's show tonight. He is with us down the hall. He's got a little bit of sniffles going on, so he's keeping his distance tonight, but he is here. So we're just going to go ahead and start with him. If you can just make some notes of any of your questions and hold them till the end, that would be great. And then we can kind of just go back through it. So Kyle, floor is yours.
Excellent. Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Council. Apologies. I did intend to be in chambers tonight, but that probably wouldn't be smart. So I will go from here. And so Todd is going to take us through some slides here for our annual budget document, our policy, our review, what that general process looks like. And so this first slide, I want to convey kind of what 4 things, mainly the annual budget serves. So first of all, it serves as a policy document, so review and approval of financial resources by council during the budget process serves as the policy document identifying priorities for the upcoming year. It also serves as an operational guide. Financial controls are set forth upon the passage of the annual budget to guide city employees regarding projects, events, and level of service expected. Also, the annual budget is a mechanism by which city funds will be managed during a given period. Allocations are based both on current and long-term needs and account for unforeseen contingencies. And lastly, the annual budget is a public document. The annual budget provides a comprehensive list of city functions, projects, and services in one document. It also, the review process allows for and encourages public review of city operations and their impact on citizens. Next slide, please, Todd. So the annual budget process, so we operate on a calendar year basis, as I'm sure everyone is aware. We adopt our annual budget in December for the following year's revenues and expenditures. The annual budget uses an incremental budgeting approach that assumes for most functions that the current year's budget is indicative of the base required for the following year. Any increases are incremental and are based on need, emerging issues, council goals, and available resources. The implementation of the annual budget does begin potentially in late spring and certainly through the summer, with preparation of the following year's budget following this timeline that you see below. And I'll take you, if it's hard to read, I'll take you kind of through this process. So late spring, early summer, department requests for staff, program services, major changes to current operations are proposed. Internal staff will then review proposals and review availability of funds for feasibility of proposals. In the late summer, directors prepare budget requests for the upcoming year. And then in September, the proposed budget is presented to the mayor for development of preliminary budget recommendation, and a public hearing is held for citizen input. In October, preliminary budget is presented to council, public hearing on sources of revenue is held. And as we get from October through November, council review of the preliminary budget and adoption of property tax levy and final hearing on proposed budget is held. And then finally in December, we go through final review and adoption of the annual budget. Next slide, please, Todd. So we'll get into the mechanisms of accounting here that the city undertakes. And so the city, the accounts of the city are organized on the basis of funds. In 2023, we will use 26 separate funds, each serving a specific role. These 26 funds all fall within one of the following three fund parameters. Governmental funds serve as the vast majority of the funds that the city uses. And some of those examples include the general fund. We all know about that, the streets fund, real estate excise tax. The second one is proprietary funds. The proprietary funds are used to account for services where all or most of the costs are financed or recovered from the users of such services. So you have your golf operations. We self-insure for unemployment, and we have a health reimbursement fund that falls within this category as well. The last one is our fiduciary fund. We have one fiduciary fund, and those account for assets held in a trustee capacity on behalf of others. And so our specific example is our custodial fund that we have for periodic remittances to the state treasurer. And so when we receive those funds in, those are non-revenues, and we account for those as such in the custodial fund. And we have an equal offsetting expenditure to account for those when we make our periodic payments to the state treasurer. Next slide, please, Todd. So we'll get into the first one here, governmental funds. These are the ones that we, I think, touch on the most. I'd say obviously everybody's aware of the general fund. That is the primary operating fund of the city. It accounts for all financial resources and transactions except those specifically required or elected to be accounted for in other funds. We have special revenue funds. Special revenue funds account for revenues that are legally or legislatively restricted to finance particular activities of the city. And a couple of examples of those is our streets fund. We have, as a council prior, have legislatively restricted the utility tax towards streets operations. Another one that would be a legal restriction would be our tourism and our lodging tax dollars. Those are legally restricted by our RCW. In addition to stormwater as well. Our capital project funds. So capital project funds support the acquisition, major construction, or renovation of the city's major physical assets. Such projects add value to the community or significantly increase the useful life of a facility. And so, we've touched on, real estate excise tax and what those revenues do for our ability to contribute to capital projects and obviously other funds related to that as well. And so finally, we do have one debt service fund. Debt service funds account for the accumulation of resources to pay principal, interest, and related costs on general long-term debt. Obviously, as we get into 2023, we will begin the process of paying down the financing of the trailhead improvements. Next slide, please, Todd. So the second is our proprietary funds. And so those are comprised of two separate sub-funds. So enterprise funds account for operations that provide goods or services that are supported primarily through user charges. So that's your golf operations fund. And then also internal services funds that we touched on already. They operate on a cost reimbursement basis. And those are our unemployment and our medical reimbursement funds. And then obviously we've already touched on our fiduciary fund. So next slide, please, Todd. And so I want to touch base on the actual basis of accounting that the city uses. And so Liberty Lake operates on a cash basis form of accounting where revenues are recognized only when cash is received and when expenditures are paid. And so there's an important delineation here between cash basis and accrual accounting. A lot of larger entities use accrual accounting. And one example of how those differentiate is recently council approved the purchase of 28 golf carts. And so we had to account for that purchase in 2022, even though we know that we're not going to expend those funds until 2023. And so that's an example of where you have a difference in when these expenditures are reported. And so the general revenue and expenditure projection policy, I'll just touch on a portion of what that entails. And so the city has a well-diversified and stable revenue system currently in place. We'll obviously strive to maintain a healthy mix of both elastic and inelastic revenue sources. Since revenues are sensitive to local, regional, and national economic activities, estimates provided to the city council will be conservative. Services will generally match the city's inelastic revenue sources. And if at any time during the year expenditure and revenue re-estimates project an operating deficit, the city will take immediate corrective action in the form of various mechanisms to mitigate that deficit. And those can come in the form of, obviously, as you can see here, hiring freeze, service reduction, or potential use of the restricted revenue fund.
Yeah, which is what we did during COVID.
Next slide, please, Todd. We've touched on this at our last meeting, but this is also a very important piece of the budget document, is identification of capital projects and the mechanism by which we execute that. So the capital facilities plan is a planning document adopted annually that reflects both new projects and asset management investments scheduled for implementation or completion over the preceding 6 years. So projects identified in the annual CFP will have an in-house funding source dedicated to each project, but will also be eligible for other various local, regional, state, or nationwide funding mechanisms by their inclusion in the city's capital project planning document. So it is important to identify as many projects as we can. Potentially they're still unfunded, but for inclusion in that document, because we never know when a funding source may present itself to take advantage of a project or mitigate cost of a project we already know that we are going to fund. Next slide, please, Todd. So further along in your budget binder, you'll find a fee schedule. And so the city will charge user fees for various services when it is appropriate and permitted by law. Fees will generally be set at a level related to the cost of providing the service. Staff will review user fees at least once every 3 years to adjust for the effects of inflation and other factors as appropriate. And you'll see a numerous list of fee schedules. Obviously, planning has their own set of fee schedules. Golf operation has their own set of fee schedules. The library has their own fee schedule, and City Hall has their own fee schedule that you'll see in your budget binder. Next slide, please, Tom. So I want to go through a summary of our special revenue funds to get everybody an idea of what maybe these lesser used funds entail. And so obviously, the streets fund is a pretty major fund, but that is classified as a special revenue fund. Obviously, we have allocated utility tax to fund street operations. Our tourism promotion fund levies a 2% lodging tax on nightly stays for use of community events that support tourism to our area. The tourism promotion capital fund is an additional 1.3% lodging tax that would identify a larger scale improvement that, as the industry terminology would say, increases heads and beds. And so that could be a local event center, a local sports facility, things of that nature that would draw regional or potential statewide, draw to the increased the amount of nightly stays in our area. So and then finally, for tourism, the tourism promotion area is our pass-through fund. Visit Spokane approached us earlier this year with the potential to increase this from $2 to $4 per stay and develop a regional tourism promotion marketing effort with the county. And so this is currently at $2 per stay, and it goes towards a professional marketing service, which we contract through Visit Spokane, and they collect all of the dollars that we generate through this $2 fee. The Harvard Road Mitigation Fund is a benefit district that charges impact fees based on proposed land use. And those fees go back into, obviously, that area, improving transportation infrastructure. The Stormwater Utility Fund charges an annual service that is collected with property tax, obviously towards remediation of stormwater and increasing infrastructure to handle that capacity. The Aquifer Protection Fund is charged per water sewer connection and is also charged with a property tax, and that is obviously to mitigate any negative impacts on regional aquifer. Next slide, please, Don. So here's our list of funds that are supported almost solely by the general fund. This gives you an idea of different mechanisms that the general fund interacts with the rest of these funds. And so the Parks and Arts Fund, Restricted Reserve, Library Capital, Municipal Facilities, Community Messaging, Underground Utility, and the Building Contingency, those are all funded, or I could say refunded in some cases, by the general fund. So one of those examples would be, we have allocated $125,000 as a pot of money in the Building Contingency Fund. And so let's say we spend $18,000 of that in 2022, we are going to propose to refund or reset that Building Contingency Fund to $125,000 each year. And that does not mean that we're going to spend that money each year. That rolls over. That is a reset amount to that fund each year. The Police Capital Fund, obviously along with the Library Capital and some of these other funds, have historically been provided as needed funds from the general fund. Recently, we have had a couple of substantial donations from a local business that we have placed in the capital fund for them to use for various improvements. We replaced the HVAC system, or we replaced the generator in there, and we replaced various miscellaneous equipment in the police department with those donations as recently as this year. Next slide, please, Todd. And so we've gone over these as well. So these are just identifying, obviously, all of the different fund uses that we have within our budget. And so we've already hit on both the unemployment and medical reimbursement fund. The unemployment fund we self-insure for. And so I believe back in 2010, we did pay into unemployment insurance. And I think if we project that out today, we'd be paying roughly $30,000 to $35,000 a year for that. We've averaged in reimbursing by self-insuring, we've averaged about $15,000 a year recently. So we are realizing cost savings there. And then our medical reimbursement fund is an HRA that is part of the city's medical cafeteria plan. And it is funded up to $5,000 per individual and is used up to once a employee meets their deductible, they're then eligible for this medical reimbursement fund up to their out of pocket, which truly serves as a full coverage for our employees. And we will dive deeper into the specifics of that, of our medical insurance as we dive through the budget process. But we do use that on occasion when people are above their deductible. They're then eligible for medical reimbursement through this fund. Next slide, please, Don. That pretty much covers it. I apologize if I kind of blew my way through that, but I would stand for questions. If anything needs further explanation, I can certainly hear those now. So
yeah, so I think at this point, if you guys have questions for Kyle, we can do that. And then I was just going to make some suggestions, especially for anybody new or returning, as to how to kind of, you know, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? You know, different approaches to this is based on experience on my side, happy to share. And I'm hoping others based on experience are happy to share as well. So who would like to hit Kyle up with any questions first? Councilmember Dunn.
Yeah, hey, Todd, could you throw that slide deck back up, please? We'll back it up to the litany of funds supported by general fund. Couple more forward.
that's a couple more, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So to recount what I perceive, Kyle, these each are unique. And when considering the balance of the general fund, they are not incorporated into it. They're separate.
Correct. They are linked through what is called an interfund transfer to fund those activities as identified by each special fund supported by that general fund.
Gotcha. And then you said on an annual period, we would take and regenerate, I'll call it, those funds based on general.
Correct, based on use. And so we usually have a marker where it starts each year. And so we don't, let's say we're funding Parks and Arts at 34,000 this year. If they only spend 5,000, we're resetting to 34 based on need.
Gotcha. So the movement between general and these various funds isn't necessarily, well, I'm trying to think. It isn't recognized per se. It's the spending of the city that goes out, for example, in vouchers and other effects, but the interfund transfers, you're performing that work in the background, well, when necessary to replenish these funds.
Correct.
All right. And then back up a couple more, please. Quick review. The one that just talked about the definition of government proprietary fiduciary.
Keep going.
Just before that, other way,
Yeah.
back.
Back toward the beginning.
Yeah, it was wonderful work here, Kyle, and just to have some really basic kind of floor level perceptions and understanding. The clarity of the definition was actually really helpful for me. Let's see. Yeah, the next one. Just have this wonderful bullet slides, just government proprietary and fiduciary.
Keep going back, Todd.
Yeah, there's two of them. Head back one more, please. Gosh.
There you go.
I lost.
One more would be fine.
More, yeah. Yeah, this is great. So what I try to do in my mind is quickly think to permit revenue, for example, is contributing to a government fund or proprietary fund?
Government fund.
Yeah, those are actions, I'd say, not necessarily proportional to the use, but per se required for the action of the city. So, okay. Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate I'd like to say the basic fundamental approach helps put some back to my understanding. Thanks.
Right, thanks. Anybody else? Councilmember Cargill.
Thank you, Mayor. Todd, can you go back to I think it was the first slide. Sorry, second slide. And Kyle, I just want to make sure I understand this based on your response to Councilmember Dunn's question. Yes, this one, thank you. Where on that second bullet point where it says, for most functions that the current year's budget is indicative of the base required for the following year. So to follow up on that, if, let's say in the example that you gave, if Parks and Arts comes back and let's say their budget was $50,000, just for argument, and they only spent 25, we're assuming as a city that they need the 50 in the following year?
No, so that would fall under one of those others where you can identify exact, I guess, uses or exact activities of that fund. And so you have, you know, they have identified art pieces that they're going to tackle in a given year. So if they tackle that, we can then zero base those. So
Right.
you can, and so incremental involves, you know, a multitude of different functions that go on a, you know, monthly, daily basis. You're not trying to capture, you know, 6,000 different costs and trying to pile those up. Ones where you have Parks and Arts or some of these, you know, more activity centric, you know, you have the 1 or 2 major activities a year. You can identify exactly what those are and budget accordingly.
Okay, so when this says that the incremental budgeting assumes that the current year budget is indicative of the base required for the following year, that's, I mean, I guess I can kind of put an asterisk next to that. If,
Right, and we say in that bullet point, we say for most functions.
right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And you were reading my mind when you said zero-based budgeting, so thank you.
You're welcome, Kyle. All right, Mayor Pro Tem, I see your face on here, so I figure you have a question. Go ahead.
I do. Thank you, Mayor. So a couple questions. One of the things I find very helpful as we work through the budget process is referring back to the previous year, the year before, the year before. So you have some historical information to produce your upcoming year's budget. I think in the past, any unused funds have just stayed in the general fund, and has actually, in a roundabout way, created another savings account within the general fund for the city. But we don't really acknowledge it until well into the next financial year. Is that correct?
So where we could potentially realize cost savings is, so maybe capital projects that aren't fully completed where we thought they were, or activities in these other funds that are supported by the general fund haven't used all of their resources. And so those are, you can potentially either roll over funds based on if you have an active project in the works and you need to reallocate or, you know, kind of reset the table to get us to the finish line the next year. But in terms of specifics, you know, we don't have, you know, we don't want to double allocate potentially funds. So we essentially press the reset button where we can.
That's what I was after.
Yeah.
Thank you for that explanation. My next question is, I don't know if you're going to do it yet tonight, but can you speak a little bit about the insight of our revenue sources?
I can. So we have a public hearing next Tuesday that is specifically targeting revenue sources. And so I would like to wait on that if we can until that appropriate mechanism, because we do have a public hearing that's already advertised. But on a very high level, absolutely, you know, our revenues are coming in well above where we anticipated. And so we're very strong in terms of sales tax. You know, property taxes obviously are an inelastic revenue source. That's always what we can count on. REIT income for our capital projects has way outpaced our expectation. We've had a couple massive projects bolster that in 2022, and we do not foresee that slowing down. We don't foresee development slowing down in Liberty Lake next year, and so we can kind of we can forecast that out certainly through next year. Continued development in Liberty Lake.
So, and then one follow-up question, if I can, on the sales tax. Are you able to identify or pinpoint the source of the sales tax, or is it just, here's what you get for the month based on filings?
I signed a non-disclosure agreement when I took this job that I do have access to that, but I cannot disclose those sources.
Fair enough. Thank you.
But Kyle, you can discuss categories though, right?
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So NAICS codes and things like that, yes, absolutely.
Thank you for that, because that was where I wanted to go next
Okay,
with.
absolutely.
And maybe not tonight, but I'm curious at some point in the future if we can get some sort of a snapshot of, here's the percentage of sales tax that comes from this type of a, business, this size, so on and so on.
So yeah, we can identify that by industry. And I don't know if they have a mechanism off the top of my head by size, but we can certainly do it by industry.
And you can do the same thing with property taxes?
Yes, so we can do, so I can get a report from the county that identifies, top property tax.
Great.
Payers.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Anybody else? I think one thing that's important to note that Kyle kind of started talking about. And sometimes when you're reading through the line items on the budget, you might see for round numbers say, we appropriated in 2022, $200,000 to line item X. But something pushed that project ahead. So we only spent 20,000. So then what you'll see is the 200,000 appropriated, you'll see the actual, say the 20, but then you'll see another 180 in 2023. So it makes it look like you're spending $380,000, but you're not. And those are the things I think can trip some people up. I know it did me at first, as much as I'd worked with budgets before, being from a accrual background. But I think those are the things that do trip people up when they're going through this, and to understand that. And obviously the actuals that you have in the budget are through the end of September, correct, Kyle?
Correct, yeah.
So we can kind of extrapolate a little bit toward the actual. But those are the things when we get into the line items that, hey, if there are questions, that's what we'll get into. Okay, why is it this way? And hopefully a lot of that is explained in the notes. We took great care, and like Phil said, I had my 2022 proposed budget next to this one. So we're making sure some of the line items matched up on notes, because some of us who have been looking at this for years and years, we know what those line items are for, but it's definitely not obvious to people on the outside. We want the budget to be user friendly for everybody in the community. Go ahead, Councilmember Cargill.
Thank you, Mayor. Kyle, two more questions for you. Since we're talking about just like the budgeting guide today, I'm not going to get into the line items here, but I do have one question regarding how we select our official banking institution. So that note is on page 24. How often do we do that where we go through the process of putting out to bid?
So I can certainly research that and get an official answer back to you on that. I want to say, gosh, looking back through some documents, we went out, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago.
That's about right.
We were with US Bank for a chunk, and then I know recently we put out that RFP and switched over to Banner.
Is there any?
I will get an official. I'll get a yearly or an idea for how many years that we go in between RFPs.
Okay, that'd be great. I'm just curious to see, and if it's time for us to put it out to bid again, or if there's a process regarding that. The other question I had for you is, it was the line talking about how fees set at a level related to the cost of providing the service. I know that in last year's budget, there was a specific line item. Of course, I don't have it written down in this year's budget, but there was a specific line item in the budget guide that talked about the Gulf Services Fund in particular, and how the goal of the city was to try to bring in enough money to provide services for the Gulf.
Absolutely, yes.
Is that, I haven't seen that in here. It looks like there's more of just a general statement Is that right?
When we were going through this process and especially calling out that piece of the budget, this I believe was early on in 2022. We had identified that as at the time not a realistic statement. And so I think the discussion among council was, well, this is not something we can be held to at this time, so we probably need to take it out.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that it's not a realistic statement. I do think that we should try to have something in there that says that's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I like the fact that we call out and say fees set at a level related to the cost. Even if it's just aspirational.
Mhm. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and this being a policy document, that's something we can talk about
Yeah.
during the process. Yeah. Great. If there's no more questions, I will just give a little bit, and again, some of this is, I know, Councilmember Spencer isn't here, Councilmember Van Orman's not here, but we are going to obviously get the video out to everybody, including them, once it is available, but just a note, and this is again, something that tripped me up when I first started doing all this. So as you're going through your budget, you'll I'm sure by now have noticed that there's kind of a summary page that's in portrait mode, followed by the line item detail that's in landscape mode. If when you're going through this and planning your questions, I would suggest having the questions on the line item detail and be able to identify, that fund number, the 1, 3, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the 9-digit fund number or counting number on those lines when we're asking our questions. So when we get to that meeting, we'll literally be going through page by page. But that summary sheet is just that. It gives some overviews. It gives you your full-time and part-time employees, some general notes about the overall changes to the fund. But we'll concentrate on the line items, because I remember starting out saying, oh, I've got all these questions. Why is this such a difference? Well, had I turned the page and looked at the line item detail, the answers were there. So just another, hopefully a useful tip as you're going through this to try to make your way through it a little easier. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I know a question that I've asked since I've been on the council, so I'll ask it again. And you're probably the best to answer the question. Can you maybe give a little insight as to the interaction with the department heads and establishing their part of the budget?
So yeah, department heads, and this is a great part about Liberty Lake, is the department heads put forth their own budget requests. And so when you see the line item detail for the PD, you're seeing Chief Simmons' input directly into this budget. Same goes for obviously Jen Camp and Lisa Key and Jandy Humble. For all of their respective line items, you're seeing that specific request coming directly from them.
And we also have had director level meetings to kind of brainstorm, our kind of our big wish lists. I actually think it's probably still on the whiteboard at the PD. Some things that we're hoping for next year, and how does that fit into the budget? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, if there aren't any, then we can go ahead. I didn't think this would take real long, but just want to allocate the time on the meeting notice just in case. So, does anybody else? I know, Lisa, well, I do see, at least one newer, community member here. I don't think, I'm looking at the agenda. I don't think we have citizen comments scheduled for the end. Let me look it up, but if we do, okay, so let's, I've got too many windows open. I apologize. So I've lost my agenda copy. Oh, there it is. Okay. So, so if there's no more questions from council, we can go ahead and open it back up for citizen comments again. Again, nobody here in council chambers. So if anyone who's joining us by Zoom, if you want to make up to a 3-minute comment, just shoot a quick note to Todd Henderson in the chat and we will take your comment. I'm glad at least one or two community members took interest in our workshop tonight. Thank you for that. Are you seeing any, Todd? Okay. All right. So with no citizen comments, any other questions or anything from council?
Do we get to sing happy birthday?
No, that's okay, but thank you for the sentiment. I appreciate it. It was a good day. It was a good day. Thank you. So yeah, not hearing any further issues, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 7:40. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.